Hello, Rotarians and friends. Good morning. I am Sunny Coloma from the Rotary Club of Alabang, and I am one of your moderators today. We are privileged to have a renowned panel that would share with us their views on global development and philanthropy. We have three panelists who will each speak in turn for 15 minutes to be followed by a Q&A session. Our first panelist is Peggy Dulany. Peggy is founder and chair of Synergos, a global organization helping solve complex issues around the world by advancing bridging leadership to promote trust and collaboration among grassroots groups and government or business leaders and people who otherwise would not have access to each other in order that they could talk about overcoming poverty. She co-founded Synergos Global Philanthropist Circle with her father, David Rockefeller, to support philanthropic families in using this approach. She has sat on over 30 nonprofit and corporate boards. She runs two socially responsible businesses, a grass-fed beef and guest ranch in Montana, and an ecotourism operation in Namibia. Through Synergos, she also guides wilderness retreats that offer participants a safe space in which to reflect on their deepest purpose in life. Peggy is an undergraduate of Radcliffe College and holds a doctorate in education from Harvard University. Friends who lead with a Rotarian heart, let us welcome Peggy Dulany, who will share with us her thoughts on bridging leadership and the power of building trust. Good morning, Peggy.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I wish you all a good morning. I'm actually calling in from my ranch in Montana, where it has been a beautiful day. And I want to start off by saying that my understanding of what bridging leadership is really came from my time in the Philippines with friends and colleagues in your country. There's something, and I know you're going to resonate with this, there's something about the culture of the Philippines that is good at networking, is good at being warm and welcoming, and good at reaching out across divides and thinking how to make things better. So from many colleagues and friends in the Philippines, I give my thanks and my admiration for the ways that you have lived your lives trying to create the kind of collaborative networks that would create a better society. I also want to acknowledge that the Rotary Club is the very essence of what we call a bridging organization. First of all, it is local, it is national, and it is global. So as inevitably needs to happen, people create their friendships, their networks, their communities locally. But then there's certain people, and there must be many in the Rotary Club, who, because of their desire to do good, or as I call it, serve with love, make it a practice to listen deeply to others, even if those others have different views than their own. And through that listening, they gain the credibility to be able to convene people with different views and ideologies, maybe with different religions, from different sectors, and from different vertical layers of society. Because without that, in the diverse and complicated and conflictual world that we live in, we're not going to resolve the problems that we're facing. You know what these problems are, and we can talk about that in the discussion. But from all the experience I have working through Synergos in countries like India and Bangladesh and South Africa, Namibia, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and Brazil and Mexico, what we found is that there are bridging leaders in every sector of society, and that if one can identify them and bring them together to solve a problem, the way, in one of the best examples there is, that Rotary really got behind the solution of eliminating polio, which is such an extraordinary achievement, that those people have the power to go beyond their own little group to then convene people from many other parts of society. But what does that entail to get there? This is what I've been studying for the last number of years. First of all, many of us live in fear or shame or grief or guilt, a lot of negative things that come from traumas that have happened to us personally or societally. They may have happened in childhood, or they may have happened because of climatic events, which certainly have affected the Philippines very seriously. And that trauma leads to a lack of trust. It leads to people being afraid to show themselves and to be their best, fullest, more whole selves. So how do we help within the groups with we interact to overcome those fears so that people can feel more self-confident and more willing to show who they really are behind the mask that we all tend to wear to protect ourselves? This is part of the process of building trust that was mentioned as one of the themes of this evening. And what I would say is that group by group, and it usually starts with a fairly small group, the dialogue is improved to the degree that the other participants are willing to listen deeply to each other and respect what they have to say, even if they don't actually disagree, if they do disagree. So that deep listening requires what? It requires not having so many preoccupations of daily worries or whatever in the way of your giving your full attention to the person speaking. It probably will require the ability to listen with your eyes, listen with your ears, and in some ways, even more important, listen with your heart. Not just that buzzing mind that's constantly thinking about what's happening, what do I have to do next, where do I have to be? So the kinds of clubs that Rotary represents offer this possibility. You get to know each other as a group. You tell your stories, as was just suggested, as a powerful way of selling the mission of Rotary. And you come little by little to take off those masks, to speak your own truth, even if it's vulnerable, even if it sometimes leads to tears. And the amazing thing about that is that as somebody shows a true aspect of themselves, an emotion, a wish, a regret, other people can see that as authentic. And that kind of authenticity is gold. Because once people see that you're really the person you're showing yourself to be, then that begins to build trust. And it also inspires others to risk that kind of vulnerability and to risk showing themselves. And little by little, that group or that community begins to believe that actually, if I show my real self, the other people are going to respect me more. They're going to trust me more. They're even going to love me. And at the bottom of this is creating those linkages that will lead to trust and love, and eventually to all the members of that group as they feel more empowered by the collaboration and the trust in the group, to increasing whatever desire they may have come to it with to serve with love, which is the only way we're going to get there in this world. So maybe just a few words before I close about the role of philanthropy in all of this. First of all, philanthropy, from the Greek word, means love of humanity. It never said anything about the amount of money you have or the amount of money you give, although that is what a lot of people define it as. Now, the truth is that people who have less resources give percentage-wise more than people with more resources. So when I talk about philanthropy, I'm definitely not only talking about the wealthy, because it's actually the poor and the solidarity that they feel for their own communities with people in trouble that are probably the biggest investors in the well-being of humanity. Those people who are fortunate enough to have financial resources beyond what they need to live, in my view, can only be effective if they go through these same stages that we talked about building trust with a community, reaching out beyond divides. Let's say someone wants to give money to education. If they don't visit schools or understand what is holding back the achievement of children in schools, is it issues in the family? Is it issues in the technology? If they're not really listening before they decide how to invest their resources, then chances are those resources will be accepted, but not necessarily appreciated in the way that they would have been if the people they wanted to support had been part of the identification of the problem and part of the design of the solution. So when I talk with philanthropists, I always talk about the importance of true and deep listening and collaboration with other people, be they business people or activists. In some cases, it could even be government. Because if we don't join forces and design solutions that are going to be sustainable, that everyone can agree to, again, we're not going to get to the end. I just wanted to say a couple more words about how we get to the larger achievement of peace and well-being for our community and our society and ultimately the world. That aspect of a safe container within which people can learn to trust each other and feel more empowered as a group is a first step. It leads to a sense of belonging and to a broadening of the sense of community. Some people talk about bonding networks and bridging networks. Bonding is more with people who are of the same social background or the same wealth level. Bridging is when you reach out beyond that, and that is when you begin to get trust that can get to a societal level. But also the feeling safe and the feeling that you will be respected for your authenticity leads to an opening of the heart and a lessening of fear. And that lessening of fear enables curiosity, and curiosity then leads to the opening of the imagination, which leads to creativity. And the curiosity is the opposite of judgment. Too often we jump to judgment, and usually that's a result of fear. But if, in fact, we can stay in that open-hearted, open-minded way of being curious about why this person might be speaking this way or why they're acting that way, and really listen in a genuine way, then we begin to build the trust at a broader level. And finally, if we can be in that place of the total listening of what we would call presence. So you're focusing on exactly who you're talking with, who you're listening to, and the group that you're convening or that you're part of. Then that presence opens us up beyond that to gratitude, to compassion, to humility, which is an area that is so needed, the opposite of which is the opposite of bridging leadership. Because if people have a big puffed up ego, they're not going to be truly listening. And finally, to love. And I want to come back to that because I heard in all the things that were spoken before, that this is key to the hearts of Rotarians, that people join because they believe in making a difference, be they community volunteers or be they business people. So I give really my profound thanks that this particular organization here that I'm speaking with is linked with organizations all over the Philippines and all over the world. You can and you do and you will and you have made a difference. And for that, I express my very strong gratitude. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Peggy. You have shared with us very deep insights. We need to listen deeply, listen with the eyes, listen with the heart, build trust, give full attention to the person speaking, because it is gratitude and humility that will lead to true love. Very important lessons. Thank you, Peggy, for sharing them.
Thank you.
Let us now hear from our second resource person, a global leader in development. Gloria Steele is COO of CARE, a global organization dedicated to ending poverty and improving the lives of women, girls, and vulnerable populations around the world. CARE works in 104 countries around the world on projects to fight poverty and provide humanitarian aid. Last December 2020, Gloria retired from USAID after 40 years of public service, including senior positions at USAID's Bureau for Asia from 2015 to 2020. She was USAID's Mission Director for the Philippines, the Pacific Islands, and Mongolia from 2010 to 2015. She began work at CARE, but after 3 weeks, Gloria was called back again to USAID when US President Joseph Biden Jr. asked her to serve as acting administrator of USAID, a position she held until end of April 2021. She is now back at the helm of CARE. Her awards include the Presidential Meritorious Executive Award and Presidential Distinguished Executive Awards from no less than 2 United States presidents, and the Order of Sikatuna Award from the President of the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Rotarians and friends, let us welcome Gloria D. Steele, who will talk about the opportunities and challenges of sustaining development impact. Good morning and welcome, Gloria.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. It is my great pleasure to be with all of you today. I would like to thank Ms. Raissa, Hechanova Posadas, District Coordinating Chair for Community Service, and Ms. Chacha Camacho, Governor of District 3830 of the Rotary Clubs of the Philippines, for inviting me to join all of you today. I would also like to recognize my co-panelists, Ms. Peggy, Dulany, founder and chair of the Synergos and Global Philanthropic Circle, and Mr. Laurence, Lien, CEO and co-founder of the Asia Philanthropic Circle. The COVID-19 pandemic has profoundly changed the world as we know it. In addition to the serious health impacts that have gripped our lives, COVID-19 has had far-reaching second-order impacts on the economy, on food security, on livelihoods, on education. It has devastated all sectors in all countries all over the world. It is estimated that COVID-19 will push around 425 million people into poverty, reversing the tremendous hard-earned progress achieved before this pandemic. It has also dramatically increased the number of people facing acute food insecurity in 2020-2021. According to the World Food Programme, as of April 2021, 296 million people in the 35 countries where it works are without access to sufficient food. That is 111 million people more than a year ago. Rotary is dedicated to causes that improves people's lives by building international partnerships. Now is indeed an opportune time to pause and reflect on the importance and relevance of international partnerships and collaboration, the topics that has brought us together this morning. We know that ending COVID-19 is a collective global challenge that requires collective global action. Partnerships and collaboration across country boundaries are critical if we're going to see the end of this pandemic. Recovery is possible, but the world can only get there through more effective and more coordinated partnerships. In this case, the priority is in making vaccines accessible to everyone. As they say, no one is safe until everyone is safe. For more than 4 decades, I've dedicated myself to helping make the world a better place, to helping lift people out of poverty, the same goal fostered by Rotarians around the world. My quest to help make the world a better place has led me to focus my work on development assistance and humanitarian response. Whether improving food security, creating employment opportunities, improving access to high quality health and education, promoting peace and security, combating climate change, or supporting technological transformation, several factors are critical in achieving effective and sustainable development and progress. Let me share a few with you that I've learned over 4 decades of working in development and humanitarian assistance. First is the focus needs to be on promoting locally led development and the achievement of self-reliance. We cannot successfully eliminate poverty, promote peace, or achieve food security unless the countries themselves and their people and institutions are committed and capable of mapping out a strategy to address these problems. Locally led development and strengthening local commitment and capacity of countries to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals are the essence of self-reliance. This leads me to the next factor, country ownership. As a development practitioner, I have seen time and again that unless partner countries own the problems and the strategies to address those problems, progress cannot be achieved, at least not on a sustainable basis. We cannot want the change more than they do. The third factor is good governance. Citizen-centered governance is critical. This means that governments must recognize the needs of its citizens, must invest in stronger education and health systems, must formulate and implement policies that are conducive to economic transformation and growth, must support civil society, must combat corruption, must foster transparency, and overall must be committed to promoting social justice. And the fourth is a commitment to achieving results and accountability. Sustainable impact are not possible without setting specific targets, measuring accomplishments against those targets, and holding everyone involved accountable for their part in reaching the targeted results. Success is often iterative and is not always assured. However, failures provide opportunities for everyone to learn, and good development encourages learning. And finally, the all-important partnerships. Partnerships play a critical role in replicating and scaling up successful initiatives. Partnerships come in different forms and through different platforms. We talk about public-private partnerships, partnerships with civil society, partnerships with community leaders, and direct partnerships with the private sector. When I was the country director for the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, in the Philippines, we envisioned a scaled up mobile money and e-payment operations in the country. At that time, the economy, as many of you may recall, was largely cash-based. We found that a crucial requisite step was to partner with the Banco Central to ensure that appropriate financial regulations were in place for banks, mobile telecom operators, and remittance networks to be interoperable. That was a perfect example of a highly successful national level public-private partnership, which promoted the use of digital technology and fostered financial inclusion for the millions of people, particularly those who were unbanked. It also accelerated the growth of e-commerce in the Philippines. Let me end with an example of another successful partnership and collaboration, this time between USAID, the Rotary International, and the city government. In April 2020, as the USAID country director, I had the privilege of inaugurating a septic treatment facility and a sanitary landfill in the city of San Fernando. These facilities were designed to provide access to safe drinking water. The septic facility and the sanitary landfill were constructed through a partnership with the city government of San Fernando, La Union, which donated over 1 hectare of land for the facility. And the Rotary International and USAID provided technical assistance and funding for the construction of the septic treatment facility and the sanitary landfill. The project addressed a major health problem. At that time, diarrhea was the leading cause of illness in the Philippines, killing over 25 children under age 5 each day. The construction of these facilities was also beneficial to the economy of San Fernando and to protecting its environment. I was truly proud of having been part of this important partnership. There are many other examples of successful partnerships and collaboration that we can talk about. However, let me end here. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join this panel.
Thank you very much, Gloria, for your comprehensive sharing of insights. I noted down at least 5. First is to focus on promoting locally led development. Second is country ownership. Third is good governance. Fourth is measurement and accountability for targeted results. And fifth is partnerships. I think it would elate you to know that just recently our Bangko Central moved further along the path to financial inclusion by focusing on a more comprehensive financial education program to include our overseas Filipino workers, beneficiaries of the 4-piece program that Secretary Dinky Soliman initiated. Secretary Soliman is in the audience, and especially for sharing the partnership between Rotary and USAID for the septage treatment plant in San Fernando. It's very prophetic that the name of the province is La Union, the unifying of efforts to produce good for humanity. So thank you again, Gloria, and we'll get back to you later for our open forum. Now let us hear from another philanthropist, Laurence Lien. He is the co-chair and CEO of the Asia Philanthropy Circle, a membership-based platform for Asian philanthropists to exchange, learn, and collaborate. He is also the chairman of Lien Foundation, a family foundation that has become well regarded for its forward-thinking and radical approach in the fields of education, elder care, and the environment. Laurence is also the chairman of Lien AID, or Lien Aid, the foundation's humanitarian arm for enabling sustainable access to clean water and sanitation for Asia's rural poor. He was the CEO of the National Volunteer and Philanthropist Center in Singapore, chairman of the Community Foundation of Singapore for 6 years, and prior to his work in the nonprofit sector, Laurence served in the Singapore government. He holds degrees from Oxford University, the National University of Singapore, and Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. He was also a nominated Member of Parliament in Singapore from 2012 to 2014. Laurence joins us today from Singapore and will talk about fulfilling the promise of philanthropy in Asia. Let's hear from Laurence. Good morning, Laurence.
Thanks for the introduction. I would really like to acknowledge Rotary Club, Raissa, and Rina especially for inviting me. My grandfather was an active Rotarian and my father still is in his 90s. So I know the great work that Rotary Club does. I also acknowledge my love for the Philippines. I think about 30 years ago, before I started work, I wanted to do a long trip. And I came to the Philippines. And I backpacked by land and sea from Sagada to Bohol, so I know Philippines intimately from the ground up. And since then, I've returned a few times a year, except for the past year, as part of my work at the Asia Philanthropy Circle. Next, can we have the slides and go to slide 3? As introduced, I come from Singapore, the one before that, yes. And it's ranked one of the top places to be during COVID by Bloomberg, although it's not so great, these few weeks. It's a gleaming metropolis, as you can see. But next slide. But we still grapple with many social issues. In fact, Singapore has only reached SDG achievement in 6 of the 17 goals. Next. So we look to philanthropy to plug the gaps, but yet the size of philanthropy is minuscule compared to the size of government expenditure. And if I update these charts for the past year, the size of government expenditure would have expanded greatly. And the economy, GDP, even the greatest foundations in the world, like the Gates Foundation, the entire expenditure of the Gates Foundation would run our Ministry of Education for about 3 or 4 months, and that's it. Next. So hence we have to review the role of philanthropy and to see what is really the most strategic use of resources. And this is what I'll focus on for today. Next. That the role of philanthropy in society is more than just giving money. That philanthropy in Asia also differs in ways that is practiced in the West because of the local context. And the way forward really requires collaboration between and among philanthropists as well as other stakeholders in the sector. Next. So I'll take each of these in turn and give an example each of what I've done, either the Lien Foundation or the Asia Philanthropy Circle. Philanthropy is more than just giving money. It is really also the strategic application of giving to do problem solving. So you need to put in time, your talent, to address the social and environmental problems that are otherwise overlooked. So to do this, we have to take a long-term perspective, explore the root causes of a problem, not just the symptoms, and look at the symptoms-wide issues. Now, philanthropy can play a unique role in its approach to supporting change. In a wider context, philanthropy can serve as a neutral platform to bring together different stakeholders, including businesses and the private sector, non-profit organizations, and government. And we have to engage the head, the heart, and the hands. The head and the hands, we know, they are necessary to craft the right strategies and to execute those strategies, but it is the heart, as Peggy has said, the trust, the love that are needed to connect and to inspire one another and to stay the course when things get tough, because the problems that we deal with are difficult and we're going to hit bumps along the way. Let me give you an example of what we've done at the Lien Foundation to tackle early childhood development of the most difficult group. We look at the bottom 10% in terms of income in Singapore. So what we do is with the Circle of Care program, which is designed to build a strong support system among children from low-income families, just because they face a lot of issues due to the lottery of birth. So it combines many aspects: social work, learning support, healthcare, parental guidance. I'm still on the same slide. And we are operating in 10 preschools, 2 primary schools, and we'll extend this. We'll more than double these by 2023. What is most exciting is that we are now working with government to introduce the key concepts of this program into the program for all other preschools in Singapore. APC also has a program in the Philippines working on a comprehensive ECD project and framework, which is multi-agency and includes DSWD, ECCD Council. It's led by Rina Lopez and other APC members. Unfortunately, COVID hit and it's been a bit difficult to run the full program, but we are staying the course. Next. My second point is about how philanthropy in Asia may differ in ways from the West, not because it's better or worse, but really a result of local context and the environment. Asia's philanthropy landscape is less developed. Our NGO sectors are typically less developed. And so our philanthropists often work close to the ground and know the organizations and initiatives that they support. We often hear the words distrust. There's a fair degree of distrust in the wider social sector between government and the philanthropy sector, between the philanthropy sector and the NGO, nonprofit sector. And we need to build bridges, as Peggy has said, to do the work better. But we can learn a lot from one another in Asia because there are many cost-effective solutions because of the need to do a lot with very little. Innovations can also borrow ideas and leapfrog existing practices elsewhere outside Asia. But at the end of the day, it is important to anchor these with local and regional perspectives. Asia also has a very developing nascent local NGO sector with many grassroots and community level organizations that lack the staff and capacity to grow the work. I think rather than demanding that every dollar goes directly to end beneficiaries, to programs for end beneficiaries, we need to support our local organizations to help them build up the capacity to professionalize and to be better governed. Next slide. So one example of collaboration and replicating models in Asia is our school leadership programs that APC has done. We took a model from India and we introduced it to Malaysia. It's called Pemimpin in Malaysia. And we introduced it to Indonesia as well, and it's called Inspirasi. Well, this program is to develop school principals to be more effective leaders through training and executive coaching. And it's been really successful in the two countries we have implemented this. I mentioned this particularly because right now I'm on the board of the Global School Leaders. We are planning to come to the Philippines and looking for partners. We've got really good conversations. I think school leaders, particularly, we have found during COVID times, are even more important because they are not just running the school, they are also community leaders. Next. And my third point and last point is about collaboration. The work is tough. So we need to work together and we don't want to reinvent the wheel. But collaboration is not a natural or easy process. It can be very difficult to align views or to give up control, particularly in the sector when everyone is so passionate. But we need to recognize that there are many different types of and a wide range of collaboration, and we should start with the easiest. And with the easiest to build trust, to build the sense of agency and a belief and confidence that we can work together. So that could be, for example, learning, knowledge sharing, but it could also move on to adapting, replicating models that work, coordinating, giving more difficult types of collaboration, but very impactful where they work are pooled funds for common projects or regranting to other organizations and projects that really are doing a great job. The key points, as I mentioned, is that trust is critical. It's a critical first ingredient for collaboration, and it takes time. We need patience. But we can bring in through collaboration people and capital that sits on the sidelines. As often said, if we want to go fast, we go alone. If you want to go far, we go together. Shared decision making can often result in more well thought out decisions, because we are working together. It's not just the idiosyncratic wants of a single individual. And in such collaboration, we should focus on contribution rather than attribution. So one example of this, is APC has a climate collective where we are gathering philanthropists to find meaningful entry points to climate change. I think I've lost my slides, but hope it comes back, but I'll continue. And members will take part in robust learning opportunities, collaborate with seasoned experts, with demonstrated impact in the climate change, and find opportunities to work together with fellow APC members to address climate change. And this is particularly targeted at those who are, I think in Asia, climate and environment is very underfunded. In the whole world, only 2% of philanthropy goes into climate initiatives. And 1% of the 2% actually comes to Asia. So we need more philanthropists to do this, but tackling something like climate on our own is overwhelming. It's a huge problem. As we know, it's an existentialist threat, and doing it together helps. Reduce the risk, but also increase the learning, improve the learning curve. And I'm mentioning a lot about APC. I'll just very briefly say a bit about who we are. Next. We are a platform by philanthropists for philanthropists based in Asia, membership-based. I started this with a few co-founders 6 years ago, and we're based in Singapore. Next. We have 48 members from all the different, the numbers are not coming out, all these different geographies. Next. We have a few in the Philippines, and Rina is one of our members. And these are the sort of things that we do, from learning exchange to convening and collaborating. And the whole thesis is that philanthropy should be something that we should do together. There's a lot to learn from one another. And if we really care about impact, we cannot do this alone. So with that, thank you, for having me. I'll be happy to engage in questions. But the work that the Rotary does is remarkable, and I know there are many plans, in the coming year for new philanthropic initiatives. Philanthropy is a foundation of your work, and I wish you the best for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laurence. You have left us with a very memorable statement. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We will now begin our question and answer portion for this event. We requested Rotarians to submit their questions, and Raissa joins me in this Q&A. Raissa?
Yes, hi, good morning. I just wanted to thank again Peggy, Gloria, and Laurence. Thank you once again for joining us today. I really appreciate you, Peggy and Gloria, taking time out from your Memorial Day weekend celebrations. I think we're making good time, so I think we have time for 2 questions for each of you. So let me start off with a questions for Peggy. So Peggy, you mentioned earlier that you've been to many countries around the world, in Africa, South America, and Asia as well. And the focal point of bridging leadership is trust, no? And trust is the foundation of any relationship, whether it's personal, business, or social. And so I guess my question is, how should NGOs deal with organizations and government leaders who are key to executing our projects, but may have different vested interests or may even be corrupt? How can one build trust in that scenario?
It's a great question and a difficult one. And I would say that it's not always possible to build trust. Where there is corruption, how can we trust that person to be doing things that are in the best interest of the society? So in those cases, I think we have to build the kinds of alliances that can work together, hoping that there will be a change in the corrupt, whatever the roles those corrupt people are playing, or people who are not really acting in favor of the society. And we need to work side by side around them. So collaboration is not without conflict. And where there are difficult issues, where people are clearly not working in the best interest of the society, we need to stand up and confront that. And it takes courage, because sometimes those are the most powerful people. But that is the advantage of creating the kind of trust and networks among those who in fact are favoring progressive change for the better of people, for the reduction of poverty, for climate solutions, etc.
Thank you for that. So I just have a follow-up question. How difficult has it been to build trust and collaborations during this ongoing COVID crisis, when bridging leaders seem to have faced so much demand? There's so many things to worry about, and not much time in terms of building this relationship. So can you just share with us your experience in the past year?
Yeah, well, my experience of the past year has been almost totally on Zoom. And one might think that it's impossible to build collaboration and trust on Zoom. But depending on the way you frame the gatherings, I actually believe that one can have really human connections. And especially where there are people who are really committed to positive social change, and where there's a focused approach. You can't deal with everything on Zoom together, and you can't even when it's not just on Zoom. But I appreciate so much the people that have continued to work, whether it's around COVID issues or climate issues or poverty issues, by maintaining and creating new linkages of trust by the way they're framing it in these webinars that are happening all the time.
Yeah, I think what really has happened in the past 12 months is that everybody has been able to transcend, these borders, which is actually the theme for today, right? That notwithstanding, the pandemic and all these constraints, we've been able to reach out to each other. So I think I'll pass you on now to Sunny for his questions.
Okay, we move on now to questions for Gloria. Gloria, you serve as Mission Director in the Philippines for USAID from 2010 to 2015. Could you share with us some significant insights and takeaways from your Mindanao experience? It was a conflict area, but still you were able to do significant projects. Please tell us more.
Thank you, Sonny. By the way, just as a PS postscript to our earlier discussion, Mamerto Tangonan, who is the new Deputy Governor at BSP for Digital Matters, was actually the chief of party for one of USAID's projects during my time there. And he was actually leading the effort that I talked about. So talk about scaling. Now he's at Banco Central. And anyway, that's one of the biggest accomplishments I can think of. But, when I arrived in the Philippines in 2010 was also about the time when Noynoy Aquino was voted as president, and he ran on the platform of fighting corruption in order to achieve growth. And so at that time, I wanted to, believing that one needs to align one's development programs with the goals and objectives of the country. I looked at the balance of our programs, and they were mostly in Mindanao because of the conflict. But I thought I could not pass up the opportunity to support the program of fighting corruption in order to achieve growth. And so I rebalanced our programs and looked at what were the root causes of the lack of growth. And they were constrained fiscal space, weak governance, lack of infrastructure, lack of trained human capacity. And so we structured our programs around those four constraints. And I think that a lot of the things that we were accomplished was founded on the commitment to invest in developing local capacity. When I spoke, I talked about the importance of a locally led development, and I really firmly believe that. And so we followed the agenda of the government at that time and worked with the government institutions, with civil society and the private sector to scale up the programs that we have. And I think one of the most successful scale ups was having our own chief of party now become a deputy governor in Bangko Sentral to further develop digital economy in the Philippines.
Well, thank you. That's very enlightening. If we could just shift a little bit to your job at CARE, which has a specific focus on improving the lives of women, girls, and the vulnerable population. What can Rotary do in local communities to help protect them against trafficking? Sometimes even young children are being trafficked, as indications are that the Philippines is high on the target list.
Actually, let me just back up a little bit. Actually, over time, the Philippines has put in a lot of infrastructure and policies in place to help address human trafficking. The Philippines, you should know, is in Tier 1 of the State Department's Trafficking in Persons report. Tier 1 is a list of countries that have met at a minimum the requirements that the State Department uses in measuring the efforts to address trafficking. So the Philippines is not doing poorly. However, there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And human trafficking, you were talking about sexual trafficking, is still a problem. And there is a lot that all of us can do, and there's a lot that Rotary International can do. One important thing is raising awareness among communities and households about human trafficking, about the consequences of human trafficking, and what it causes on the trafficked women and children. More recently, and especially exacerbated by COVID, is online trafficking involving children. And so it is a serious issue. And so there's the awareness raising. And then all the studies have shown that the root cause of human trafficking is actually poverty. And so Rotary International can partner at all levels, at the community, provincial, regional levels, to address the issues that create poverty among households through more productive agriculture, through micro and small enterprise loans, etc. And so, addressing issues of poverty is really important. At the national level, advocating for more policies and laws to be put in place in order to prosecute and to contain, to stop, to mitigate human trafficking is important. And then working to make sure that court cases on trafficking are decongested. So there's a lot, but I think the most important thing is awareness raising, education, and lifting people out of poverty, areas that Rotary International has played an important role in all over the world, and especially in the Philippines.
So now I have some questions for Laurence. Laurence, Rotary aims to do impactful, measurable, and sustainable projects. No, not very easy to achieve all three. So based on the projects that you've done under the Lien Foundation or through the Asia Philanthropic Circle, what would you say would be your key takeaways from these projects that you could share with us Rotarians?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. But maybe I'll go back to the project that I shared earlier. So, for example, the Circle of Care that the Lien Foundation has done in Singapore, I think I mentioned that we are now working with government. But at the start, it's a very long process. At the start, they had no interest in working with us. At the start, we didn't even know whether our program was working. So we had to measure it. We looked at things like absenteeism rate, parental involvement, elementary school readiness, to keep on fine-tuning our program. Then we realized that we need to be able to speak the government language. We need to be able to start measuring the way that what is important to the government if we want them to be a partner. So that's what we did. And on top of that, and this is also true for the Global School Leaders Program, where we are also working with government in Indonesia. We can't expect that our program would be scaled up by government. So if you are working with them, we need to be flexible. We need to learn, and this is true. I would say not just with working with government, with all other partners. Everyone comes with a little bit of a different objective function. They've got different constraints. With the government, for example, they're obsessed with cost effectiveness because they are not just as philanthropists, we can design great programs for a very small group of people and it works beautifully. But the government will say, I can't scale that at the cost that you're spending on each person. So when you work with them, you have to learn, where they're coming from, what their constraints are, and adapt accordingly. And that's what we've done. You can't have everything that you want. You have to you have to give up something when you are looking at the whole, and you're trying to win the entire war against whatever you're working on, and not just individual battles. So I think that's important to do, to be able to see it from somebody else's perspective. The second is that, a lot of work that we do is innovative. It's never been done before, and it's important, I think, for such projects to have a learning. Well, we talk about growth mindset, but I think in our part of the world, we tend not to like failures. We tend to be very risk averse. We shouldn't be afraid of failures. We shouldn't be afraid of working with our partners and say, well, it didn't work. Let's understand why it's not working. Let's start to tweak it. Start to pivot. Maybe throw it out entirely. This process is not an easy one because we tend, especially philanthropists, we tend to give grants to people and say, you do exactly this. You don't carry it out. If you don't carry it out, I'll withdraw my funding, or I won't give you all the entitled funding, or I'll just move on. But I think we need to see ourselves as partners with the implementing organizations, always adapting, always learning from failures, with that attitude to that humility, but also helping to. I think Gloria talked about building local capacity. A lot of the implementing partners lack that on the ground. I think we have to. We shouldn't insist on. I think I mentioned this earlier. Every dollar going to the end beneficiary, we need to help them build up capacity too.
Laurence, I know it's still very early days, but I know that something is at work for the Philippines in terms of the early child care development. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that, how you brought the group together, and what are the initiatives or at least the purpose and objectives of that program?
I didn't hear so well. It's about the Philippine initiative.
Laurence, this is for the early childhood care development program that you started to work on here for the Philippines.
Yes, it started with convening. It started with bringing our members together with other interested parties, So we had, Rena has been very much part of this. So the Knowledge Channel Foundation, our friends at the Zurich Family Foundation were part of this, and Jollibee Group Foundation as well. And we all had a common interest in the 0 to 8-year-old window. Not so much the first 1,000 days, because I think there's been a lot of focus on that already. Not so much when they enter elementary school, because they are part of the school system, but in between, And I think it started with sharing what our concerns are, and we wanted to tackle the early years, between from the end of the 1,000 days to before they enter elementary school, and we wanted it to be holistic, so not just on education and development, but also on nutrition, health, and safety and parenting, because all these elements are integrated, but the way that we see the individual, the way that we design programs tend to be very siloed and very much focused on one thing. We actually launched last year in March 2020 with the signing of the MOA with DSWD. I remember I was in Manila that day, but because of COVID, I was advised not to turn up for the launch. But it launched anyway, and the training in Morong happened. But because of COVID, a lot of it had to pivot to online meetings, and it had to be stalled for a while. But when it restarted, had to pivot to online meetings and asynchronous sort of deliveries, which we are doing now. It's still early days, though, as I mentioned. Thanks.
What I hear from all three of you is the need to address some solutions address some problems in a systemic way.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bridging leadership approach also adopts that. And so maybe, Peggy, you can talk a little bit about how you look at situations and how you've been able to looking at things in a very systemic way.
Thank you, Raissa. It's a little difficult to hear you, but I think I got the gist of your question about the addressing problems systemically. That is very critical to our approach of bridging leadership, because if we're just looking at the symptom on the surface, that may be relevant if we're doing direct aid in an emergency situation. But if we're trying to get to the root of the problems, we need to understand from the perspective of all the stakeholders, what is that nature of the problem? So top-down approaches, in my view, are not sufficient for solving the complex nature of problems of today. And I'll give one example from work we did in India on child malnutrition in the state of Maharashtra, where business, the state government, UNICEF, community organizations, all got together over a 6-month period. This took a long time. As Laurence says, this is not a quick fix if you really want to get to the root of the problem. To understand what were the real causes of child malnutrition and stunting there. And they spent a week in small groups visiting the best cases and the worst cases all over the state. They then retreated to the mountains to reflect deeply about how they might come up with innovative solutions. They tested those solutions in a rapid prototyping process, and they came up with several that they then applied in a district by district way. And the end result, this took 2 years, well, it took 7 years, but 2 years was the diagnosis time, was a reduction of child stunting from 39 to 23% in that state of India. So it was a huge investment of time. Unilever and UNICEF were the main sponsors and a number of the banks of India, but it really paid off in the long run. And the only thing I would say was that the corporates who were the major financial supporters at a certain point wanted to declare success and go home. And so the project ended. However, we've heard that the personal connection and the trust that was built across sectors to the people who participated was actually the main key in achieving the success, because even if people moved to different jobs or different parts of the state, they continued to relate to each other and use those principles of trust and collaboration.
That's amazing, because I think in the Philippines, no, we have I'm not sure about the statistic right now, but we have a huge percentage of our toddlers, our preschool kids, actually stunted. No, so it's a very encouraging story.
Yeah.
So, you want to? I think we still have some time, so you want to perhaps bring up some questions that we have from the chat box.
Yeah, I think we could ask all three of them. It's a very simple question, it seems, but maybe not. And the question is, what are the stay awake issues that that keep you up at night, and how do you keep doing what you do every day?
Who wants to?
Gloria or Peggy?
Yes, of course. Yes, as I said, I've spent my entire career working on development and emergency response. And that what inspired me was when I was an intern at the Philippine Department of Agriculture in the 1970s. Being face to face with the poorest of the poor, fisher folk, and the small farmers, it just struck me and made me think life cannot be this way. And since that time, I've worked on development. That's what inspires me is I know it is possible for life to be better for most people. But if we all have to work towards it, including the people themselves. I've talked about good governance, the importance of the government being responsive to its citizens, the needs of its citizens before its own needs. That is very important. But citizens also need to make their government accountable, developing local capacity in order for countries to be self-reliant. What inspires me to keep doing what I'm doing is I know it is possible to make lives better. And I know that the Rotary International believes in the same. What keeps me up at night is that it seems we were achieving great progress before pandemic in addressing poverty. UNDP numbers showing poverty rates going down, food insecurity going down, and the pandemic in just 1 year push us all back. But if anything goes down, they can come up. We've been there before. We can go up. We can make it better. We should just keep trying and know that we will get there someday.
Okay, if I could ask Peggy, the question is, with so many serious problems popping up, not just in the Philippines, but worldwide, what are your thoughts on how we should prioritize our efforts at doing service?
Yeah. Well, it depends partly on one's personal passion, because if you don't have that, you won't be able to sustain the pain and the despair and the lack of successes that it would take people like Gloria or myself who've been at this for 40 or more years. So depending on what your passion is, if direct service is your passion, go for it. If working at the local level is where you really feel you can have an impact, go for it. There's room for all of that. I also think Laurence mentioned capacity building, and I think that's a very important way to invest. And as I've talked about, from my perspective, building trust and bridging across divides is a kind of backbone that needs to happen behind any of the direct service if it's going to have a long and sustainable effect. So how to do that? It would be keeping me up if I didn't have personal practices, which I think if we don't have, it's very difficult to stay in this work. And that for me is meditation and prayer and yoga and time in the wilderness, time in nature, which restores me every single day.
Thank you, Peggy. This will probably be the last question, and it's for Laurence. This comes from our past governor, Jimmy Cura, and I think his club has worked with the Rotary Club of Singapore. And he's asking if you might know one of their past presidents, Dr. Shahul Hamid. who is very committed to projects involving philanthropy. Perhaps you can talk a little about collaboration with Rotary in Singapore, Laurence.
Well, I actually replied to him on the chat directly. We haven't had a chance to work with the Rotary Club, the Rotary clubs in Singapore. I've spoken to them before in I've given talks, but not yet. So, but certainly open to it.
Okay, thank you. And thank you to Peggy, Gloria, and Laurence. I'm sure our audience will heartily agree this has been a full-packed session of learning and knowing how to be better people in terms of our vision of being Rotarians who lead with heart. So thank you to all of you, and we hope to continually engage you in dialogue moving forward. Thank you, Peggy, Gloria, and Laurence. And we will now move on to our next segment. Raissa, thank you very much to all of you, and have a good day.
Thank you all. Bye.
Peggy, Laurence, and Gloria.